Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking time this evening to be on this call. Um, my name is Ravi Shankar, and I'm a friend of Dr. Soma. I've been living in the US for the last 20 years or more, and I work for a global consulting firm. I'm part of a advisory group that supports the US federal government, and I work in the area of cybersecurity. The topic for today is, new ways for survival in the new normal. So when we talk about the new normal, what is it? To me, it depends, right? It's the new way of doing things. When we consider the new way of doing things, it's a new normal. But the techniques we might use, are they new? They might not be, right? So let me tell you my personal story. Before this pandemic happened, what I had been doing was, just like everybody else, wake up in the morning, get ready. My day starts about like 6:30 in the morning, go to work. At work, you meet with different people. I'm on different meetings, then come back home. That's the usual life, what we know as the normal life. And what we do today is we are in a shutdown, right? We stay home. Those of us who are fortunate to work, we still continue to work, but on a remote mode. If you're an essential worker, you go to work with all the security protocols in place. So how is this thing going to change in the near future once the shutdown is lifted? So when you read in the media, like what the experts report, or what people think how the new way of going to work or going to school, going to your university, going to your colleges, right? How is this going to change? So we think that, all of this is going to change in a much, much drastic way. People are worried, people are uncomfortable, um, people are not sure what to do. But how long is this going to last? Nobody knows. So instead of thinking this as, something to be more concerned about, we may want to use certain techniques, how we can manage, you know, surviving in the new normal, what we call as the new normal, right? That's why I said, when I wrote the topic, I wasn't sure if it's new normal or we need to look at it in a different way. Our lens or approach to looking at it should be different. So let's look at some of the events that led us into the new normal, what we call as the new normal. Sometime around last January, it was reported in the media there's a new kind of virus that had been spreading around in some southern provinces within China. It's typical in the northern hemisphere over the winter months, which typically starts around November, December timeframe, goes well into March. So those of us live in the northern hemisphere, we have our winter period. During this winter, every year we do have, influenza or the flu-like symptoms, a flu-like sickness spread all around in the northern hemisphere. We call it the influenza. Most of us would call it the flu fever. It's kind of like a little bit devastating. It challenges your body. You get sick. People who cannot tolerate it have to be hospitalized. But there are also vaccinations for this influenza. Every year during the flu season, which typically starts about October, September timeframe, people are requested to take vaccination shots to make sure that, there are different types of virus strains that go around during that time. People predict that and then provide, they manufacture respective vaccines and release that to the masses so you can go and get vaccinated for that season. So you're protected from the flu. So this is something that happens, every year here in the US, in most of the developed countries, most of the countries in the northern hemisphere. Same way, in the southern hemisphere of the world, the same thing goes on. But when this thing happened in January, people thought it's like a flu-like sickness again, the coronavirus. The coronavirus is one of the flu virus, but more virulent, meaning that it's a little bit different from what the usual cold viruses are or the flu viruses are. So this started spreading rapidly, and it spread around in China, as you might all know, and then slowly started spreading around to other parts of the world. And by the time it developed as an epidemic. An epidemic is something, slowly starts and spreads around in an area, a sickness. But an epidemic is controlled. A pandemic, on the other hand, goes all over the world. And the last time this pandemic happened was in 1918. So people at the time when this thing happened, it's called the Spanish flu. People had to take drastic steps. A lot of things we do today are based on the lessons we learned from the Spanish flu. So there are documents, knowledge bases to help us how people, address that. So how we do address that pandemic was nothing new today. It's the same principle, same old principles. The virus does not have medicine, and you need to, take proper safeguards until the virus goes away. You might all be, familiar in India with chickenpox. When it comes, there's no medicine or anything, but you are requested to stay at home. There are traditional treatment methods. It lasts for 14 days. The first 7 days are typical, and then, the veracity of the virus goes down and you get better. It's the same thing with this virus as well. But once again, no vaccinations, no therapeutics. So the nations around the world control it, took drastic measures. The reason is, with any kind of a pandemic, that number of people who die has gone up drastically. With this virus, typically a flu kind of a sickness here in the northern hemisphere or in the southern hemisphere, depending upon when they have their winters, it lasts for maybe the 3-month period, and during the period, about like 60,000 people die. at least in the US, that's the documented record of how many people died due to flu. So every year about 60,000 people die. So given that, people initially thought that why is it anything different from the normal flu? So when they went back and looked at the statistics, they found the number of death rate, or the percentage of people who die out from the influenza flu, was about 0.4%. Compare that with the coronavirus or the COVID-19 disease. The percentage came out to be 5%, which is like almost 10 times much worse than an influenza. And not only that, the way it spreads around and impacts everybody. There were other viruses in the past, like in 2012, 2008, we had like the MERS, then they have the SARS epidemic. Those were all epidemics which were contained in those respective regions. So there were a lot of lessons learned from these. But this is a pandemic. It spread so easily, and a lot of people were getting sick quickly, and the numbers were going into hundreds of thousands within a matter of 1 or 2 months. And the traditional hospital systems were not able to tackle the amount of people getting sick and the amount of people who are getting very sick and who has to be hospitalized, put on ICUs. So the system wasn't prepared. So this put a challenge in front of the hospital systems, the systems that were treating people. So what it caused was, you don't have a vaccination, there wasn't therapeutics. By therapeutics, we mean methods to help people, get better, like your treatment methods. There's no known treatment methods to address this. So the next thing, what we did was, took steps to contain this disease through the best way we know. And this is from the lessons learned from the past. So that's the new normal we are in. Any questions? As I talk, I would like to stop and pause and take any questions if anybody have anything that they want to talk about. Are there anyone having any questions at this time? Okay, let me go ahead. So what do we experience in the new normal, is what we want to talk about next. How had the new normal impacted us? Personally, for me, we don't know, the future, how it's going to be. We thought, okay, this is going to be for 2 or 3 weeks initially, and then we are all going to go about our business as usual. We thought, okay, the shutdown is going to immediately reduce the number of spread around the world, and it's going to help us. There's been a lot of speculation about the virus that would not survive when it becomes warmer. The virus would not spread, But more and more, we are seeing it's almost summer in India. We are seeing, exponential spread in India. So it's scary. So we all are feeling worried, That's how we all feel. We don't know what's coming next. We don't know how long the shutdown is going to last. We don't know how things are going to evolve. So we are in an uncertain situation, right? So what does uncertainty means? So when you have a problem, when you don't understand the problem, when you don't know how to handle the problem, you are uncertain, right? A situation where you don't know what to do. So that's where uncertainty comes. When you don't have enough information, you're not fully, knowledgeable in something. You're uncertain, right? So when uncertainty happens, it causes a lot of anxiety. And with anxiety comes, a situation where you don't know, how best to handle that uncertainty. So going forward, I'm going to talk about a few techniques when things are uncertain, when things change. What do you do? So there are things that, what do we do, or what is that we can do, or what should we do, or what we must do. So going down these questions, I think we need to know what we must do, right? So I consider the current situation, for anybody, it's a change. When you say a new normal or something that is not normal, what happened? People think normalcy is associated with being something constant, right? Is it really constant? Here in the US, we used to say, it's kind of like, jokingly people used to say, nothing is constant, right? Well, the only thing constant are change, death, and taxes. So change is the first thing we say, that's a constant thing. Nothing else is constant. So is change good or bad? Change, it depends on how we perceive change. If you perceive change as a negative thing, it's not good for you. If you take change as a positive thing, it's good for you. So when change happens, you need to know what goes on within yourself. When I talk about change, change can be a separation, a change in relationship, a change in your situation. Death is a change, and losing something is a change. In the new normal, you're losing your comforts.
Ravi, sorry to interrupt you. Voice has become a bit low.
Okay, is it good now? Hey, Soma,
Hello.
can you hear me?
Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Still you can increase, I believe.
Can you hear me? I haven't changed anything. It's the same.
Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Is it clear?
Yeah, now it's okay. Nice.
Okay. Thank you. I can hear some echo, so if someone can put themselves on mute. Okay, let's continue. So with change is kind of, something you need to look at, and there are techniques to adapt change. If you know what are the things that you go through over a change, then you can address that. Yeah, someone had a question. Can you unmute that person so that they can ask the question? It's Sanjeev Kumar. Okay, a couple of them had some questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can unmute them, those who have got the questions. They are already unmuted, sir.
Okay, does anyone have a question? I saw that a couple of people raised their hands.
Those who have the questions can raise their hands so that we can try to unmute.
Srinath. Srinath Suresh, D1.
Yeah.
Okay, if you don't have any questions, I can continue.
Sir, questions we can use last of the session, sir. It is better, I think.
That's fine. Yeah, I can do that.
Yes.
Okay, let's proceed.
Yes, sir.
So when you have a change, you are in a situation where I think somebody has got a open mic or with a phone. There's echo. Thank you. So with change, there are different phases one goes through. So we are going to quickly look at, what those phases are and how you should, address that. So these are the mental stages, one goes through in a new situation, or when the situation changes, or a relationship changes, or when you, lose something. These are the mental stages that you go through. So we call this, in management training, leadership training and things like that. When you teach people, techniques how to handle change, they need to understand what goes on, psychologically within you. So it's called DABDA. So what is DABDA? DABDA is an abbreviation. So the first thing when a change goes through, you go through a phase of denial. You say like, oh, this shouldn't happen to me. Or you say, this is not something I would be impacted. It's for somebody else, but this is not something I should be worried about. That's the denial stage. So the next stage in change is anger. So after denial, the change is starting to impact you. You go through emotions and suddenly you realize the change had in fact impacted you. And that's when you have, a lot of feelings of anger. You go, why should I be in this thing? What did I do? Right? So that phase is called the anger phase. You're angry about the situation, the change in the situation. When somebody says in the new normal, you have to be shut down, people are angry. They say, why can't we do this? Right? There's less understanding of what the reality is, but they're not sure what it is, but still they are angry. That's an emotional feeling. Then after anger, they come to terms with themselves. People think, okay, I've been angry. Did it really help me? No. What should I do? Next, when they consider what should I do, that is the time they think, okay, how can I adjust myself? What can I negotiate or bargain in this situation? How can I, do trade-offs? So your bargaining can be verbal, your bargaining can be, non-actioned, which means that you might mentally think, okay, I will adjust myself to certain things. That is like you are negotiating within yourself, or you're negotiating with somebody else when things change. Hey, because I am doing this, things changed. What can you offer me, so that to compensate for this change? Things like that. That is bargaining. So the next phase would be the depression. Depression is a phase that you have come to terms with the change. You think that you have bargained, but whenever you bargain, when you negotiate and compensate, the situation is not a win-win situation. So you're not winning in that. You're basically compromising yourself. In a situation of compromise, one party, neither party is, happy about it. And what is the opposite of happy? Sadness. Sometimes it's not really sadness, it's depression, right? There's a difference between sadness and depression. But when you're depressed, you're not focused, you're not motivated, you're not challenging yourself, and you think about negative things, and then you're not really becoming productive. So that is the depression stage. So after a little while, you go into the acceptance stage. So this is the stage when you realize, okay, I tried my best, I kind of compromised, I'm changing my way of doing things, and I was worried, but I think there's nothing to worry about, or even worrying is not going to help me anymore. I have to move on, you know, this is not right. You come to an understanding that you would accept to live in the new, changed environment. So that's acceptance. So people who go through, like when you lose a dear one in your relationship, or when you have a death of somebody in your family, the people who are close to them, or when you lose a job, when you lose an object, a material object, we all go through these phases. Likewise, when something changes from one normal state to another new normal. Opposite of normal is abnormal, right? Maybe today we are in an abnormal situation. That's the best way to put it. But we call it the new normal because we have to look at it in the positive way. So that's a good thing. So it's a new normal we are looking at. So things changed. So these are the phases, the steps, the stages that we all go through. So research has shown when somebody go through these phases and get to the acceptance phase quickly, they recover quickly and be more productive. So that's the lesson that you got to keep in mind today. So when a change happens, everybody go through these phases. But when people go through these different phases, it is at what phase you are within that change and how you go to the last stage of accepting it and being able to perform. So that's the key. So that is what I would like to let you all know, in your techniques to address the new normal. Any questions? If anybody have any questions, please make a note. We may address them towards the end. So moving away from how to handle the new normal, okay? You need to have mental toughness. You need to prepare yourself, get to the new normal, work it through. And using these techniques, now with this understanding, you know which stage you are, how you can get across these stages sooner. When you get across these stages sooner and get to the acceptance phase, you start to think more productively. So once you get to that stage, what are the next things you need to do? So this is what we talk, when I mean you need to move in managing performance over uncertainty. So how would you get to sustain? So when the change happens, suddenly the change happens. So you can't spend too much time going through all the phases. Some people go through some of these phases lifelong. Some people don't even come out of this because they don't understand that these are the phases. This is how you go through. If you stay in one phase, it's not good for you. It's negative. You need to move on from these phases, move to the acceptance phase. And then once you go to the acceptance phase, then you can once again sustain and improve your performance. Even though it's an uncertainty, now things become clear. Uncertainty becomes a certainty. So next, how do you move forward after that? So you do that by managing risk. So you're all MBA graduates, so you're all going to be, getting things done. management is nothing but getting things done through other people. So this was what was taught to us, and this is what I would like to teach you guys as well. So part of different management areas, risk management is one of the key areas that's practiced in all domains of business. And it applies to how you would manage risk in the new normal as well. So when you go from a change, you go into acceptance mode, and then you become a performer who accept the new normal and get to managing risk. So here are a few techniques quickly I'll go through. Risk management is taught as, undergraduate courses, in leadership courses and all that. But the principles are very simple. You can dissect and talk about risk management for even 6 months. There are courses that teach them for 2 years. But here we see quickly condense it, and see how you can manage risk. So the first phase in managing risk is identifying what the risks are. How do you identify the risks? So simple things, you can apply these to your everyday life. So when they say, there is no vaccination for this COVID-19 situation, there are no therapeutics. So what is the risk? So when you look back and see how this disease spreads, they say it's a respiratory sickness, and the respiratory sickness spreads through somebody who has been already infected and you come in close contact with them, and it can stay in your body for about a week before you know the symptoms, and you can be asymptomatic, which means that you may still get infected but you may not get sickness, but you may still be spreading it out to other people who are vulnerable. There's also, among the vulnerable, it can be your parents, it can be somebody who already have sickness, things like that. And to yourself, how are you getting exposed? By putting yourself in a larger group of people, there's a larger chance that you might get infected. So when you think through something that can impact you, you can identify what are the risks by putting yourself in that situation. So you would identify all the risks that comes to your mind. So if I go to a movie theater, it's risky. If I go stand in a cluster of people, right, that's risky. So that's why they recommend 6 feet of separation. There's a concept of 6 feet office today that's been talked within the business circles, where the new offices would have 6 feet of separation all the way through. So anywhere you go within an office, you always have 6 feet of separation. People get into the lift, only 2 people get into the lift or an elevator. You use recycled stuff, things like that. Why are we doing this? Because we identified risks in being close to somebody who you are not familiar with, who might have a contagion, and that may infect you. So you need to identify the risks first. Identify all the risks when you have a situation. Identify the risks. Next, categorize the risk. This technique is to how to deal with the risk. So in our industry, we categorize risk as low, medium or moderate, high, and critical. So typically, we try to address a critical risk as quick as possible. High severity risk. When I say severity, all these risk categorization is based on the severity of the risk. How much of impact it can cause, So you need to, based upon the impact and how wide the impact is, you need to categorize the risk. So you need to have all the low, moderate, high, and critical risk identified. Once you identify these categorization, then you will have the next step to address the risk. How would you mitigate those risks? Mitigation means how do you resolve it? Sometimes there are problems that you can't solve. You can avoid the problem. So mitigation techniques are several out there. Either remediate, resolve, avoid, have somebody else take care of the risk. That's risk transference. So these are all the ways how you can mitigate risk. If anybody has any questions about risks, please take note of. I will answer those questions later. Somebody had raised a hand. Can you unmute this person?
So can you please explain the process of mitigation again?
Okay, under mitigation, either you can resolve, which means you have a risk, you go back and try to find how you can resolve, like solve that risk. If when you have a problem, you solve it, right? Say, for example, I have a fever. How do I take care of fever? I go take, paracetamol, ibuprofen, or one of these like Advil, Tylenol, any kind of like anasin, like medicines in India, right? Things like that you take. So that solves that problem. So that's mitigation. Solving, right? One of the ways to mitigate. The other way is to avoid. When there's a risk of, me walking, me going by a two-wheeler and getting into an accident, how do I mitigate that risk? I don't own a motorbike or a bicycle. So that way I avoid the whole concept of, me getting into an accident. You can still get into an accident. Some people can argue like, okay, I can go on the road, but somebody comes and hits me on a bike. That's a different story. But then you are not going to put yourself by being on a bike and you are riding by not first having a bike. So that is avoiding that situation. Then risk transference, right? Like when you buy insurance on something, you are actually transferring the risk to the insurance company. So something bad happens, they have to pay. You're not going to pay from your pocket. So that's risk transference. So this way, there are different ways to address risk by either assuming risk, taking it on yourself and trying to solve it, or trying to avoid it, or transferring the risk to somebody else. Is that clear? Okay, moving on. I think we have less time. Let's go to the next topic. So communication. So when we talk about communication, when it comes to management, three things are very critical as far as my area of practice, right? Change management, risk management. Go ahead. Somebody, Joseph had a question.
Yes, sir. My name is Joseph. Hello. Am I audible? Am I audible to you, sir?
Yeah.
My question is that in the same part of mitigation, we deal with the problems in one of these three ways. Is it not? Like either we resolve, or we avoid, or we transfer. Like resolving in the sense we have a solution, and in the transfer in the sense we have an option where we can transfer the risk to someone. But in case of avoid, what if the risk is inevitable?
Well, it's not inevitable. You don't put yourself in the position of the risk. If it is, unavoidable, right? You have to take that risk. In this condition, in this situation, you are taking the risk. Then you have to know how to mitigate it. It means the solution. The solution might be how to understand the risk well, and it may take time to, some of the risk, like unavoidable risk, you may have to
Yes.
take, right? But
Yes.
that risk, there's also another concept which I didn't talk about today, but taking risk always as an opportunity. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So that is one thing you need to keep in mind. When you go head on against the risk,
Mm.
and you come out of it successfully,
Mm.
there's greater achievement than
Yes.
avoiding risk. Okay.
Yeah, but taking risk as an opportunity, I agree with you in the same way. Like getting into the problem or any risk is a good thing, of course, but not being able to get out of it will be the problematic one.
Yeah. See, that not being able to get out of a risk, you need to know, you should not put yourself in a risk if you perceive that you would not be able to get out of it. That's one thing. So that's why we have risk mitigations, right? Unavoidable, if you're a doctor, you go ahead and have to treat people, other people have the liberty not to go in front of a patient who is sick with COVID-19.
Yeah.
But as a physician, you have to do it.
Mm.
That's unavoidable, right?
Yes. Yes.
But how do you take care of it? You take precautions,
Yes.
okay? And that is their solution.
Mm.
Okay, so that's what you do.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on. I think I have little time left. So one key concept I want to talk about is communication. So let me quickly talk about communication. So why communication? So we live in a world not just by ourselves, right? We have to communicate with everybody else. People live, we are in a social setting, we are social beings, so we all communicate. And that's how we learn from one another, we share knowledge, and even for fun, we have to communicate. Even for entertainment, we communicate. So communication typically involves different modes, different types of communication. By modes, I'll talk to you more about the modes of communication. So what are they? So the types of communication can be, broadcast communication, where one person says, all the other people receive the same message. So that's broadcast. Then two-way communication. There's a transmitter of the communication, there's a receiver of communication, and the receiver becomes a transmitter, and the transmitter becomes the receiver. So this is two-way. So for better communication, you communicate, you receive, you acknowledge what you have received, and then you send back your response. The response is received on the other end. The response is understood, and then communication is acknowledged. So this is the way of, making sure that communication happens both the ends, and it's understood. The information is communicated through this mode. So those are modes of other communication. When we talk about communication in the new normal, we are all shut down. So there are different types of other types of communication, like categorizing them. Like there's electronic communication, personal people-to-people communication. There's also, by text, by reading, printing media, things like that. Then there's broadcast media. So in the new normal, we need to choose what kind of communication is more effective, what kind of communication is more, something that needs to be avoided. And we need to be very careful in this new normal about being able to effectively communicate, right? The reason is there's also communication that is verbal, auditory, and what you see, visual, And when you combine all these, you need to have like an audio visual mode of communication. And when you normally do a person-to-person communication, we do. Okay, I have got only a few more minutes. I just wanted to know, check that, even if we go beyond a few minutes, if you're all okay with that. Soma?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay, let me continue. I think we'll be on time, but then just wanted to make sure.
You can be on time, it will not be a problem because
Okay.
it's few time.
So when we are talking about, different types of communication, I talked about the, verbal, visual, written form of communication, audio communications and things like that. So when you categorize like that, when you meet person to person, a personal communication, you have two people communicating, and there's so much goes more when two people are communicating in person, where you also observe the body language, right? When you're communicating to your friend, you see the way they are friendly and all that. But when you're communicating to your supervisor, there's a different types of communication. The body language changes. When you're communicating with your family, the body language changes. When you're communicating with your siblings, your brothers and sisters, the communication language changes depending upon the relationship. So that is not going to be possible in today's situation. So that's a new normal, how we communicate, how we adapt to communicate. In workplaces where we typically go to work, I said, my personal story, I have to go to work, and part of my work is, I do advisory to the government. So when I do advisory, I meet a lot of people. My job is to advise senior leadership on how to do things, how to manage their programs, projects, and things like that. And I look at the risks, I communicate to them and give them my advice on how to handle them. So it's easier for me to be sitting across in a room and talking to them in person and talking to different groups of people, team members, and then conveying my messages based upon how they react to what I say. I know some clues based on, how they, react in terms of psychologically, physiologically, their faces, the expression, the hand gestures, things like that. That's body language. So you try to read the body language and then try to accommodate and then respond back. That is not going to be, everybody does it, it kind of comes naturally to everyone. People don't see it in that way, but it all happens. Yeah, go ahead, Lavanya. What's your question? Can somebody unmute Lavanya so she has a question answered? Okay, I'm going to continue. So when you have that kind of a thing, that's not possible in the new way of doing things, right? You're going to be remote. You're going to do Zoom calls like we do today. So we don't see people, or even through videos, it's not very, clear how people communicate and things like that. So the new normal, video communication is going to become a lot more pervasive. It's going to be, people are going to be using it more commonly and adapting to those new ways of communicating and all that. So that's about communication. But what are the challenges in the new normal? So as I said, you're not going to be able to meet people to people, and you're not going to be able to travel to places to communicate. So you need to find new ways of doing things, new technologies. The digital transformation needs to happen to accommodate all these kinds of variables and bring forth the changes. So how do we overcome? As I said, going through all these, digital transformation is one area, innovative way of doing things. How we can effectively communicate. People need to challenge themselves to come about new ways of communicating, or being very clear about the communication. A simple thing about, the communication differences between the new generation and this generation. Back the people who are called here in the US, the older people are called boomers, generation who were born during World War II, who grew up during the big transformation in the country, and they are called boomers. And then there's an X generation, Y generation, Generation Z, the millennials, so different generations. So the older generations are very verbal, they want very detailed information and all that, but the generations in between are less detailed, but want to get more specific. And the new generation is much more very specific. You tell somebody who is new, in fact, like even in the management circles, we are taught that, when you approach the new generation, they all go about getting very specific information. They are very informed, so they can go find, additional information, how to do things by themselves. All you have to give them is 1 or 2 lines of instruction. Whereas the older generation have to be given a book with step-by-step instruction to do how to do things. So that's how things are changing. So we need to find things like that, how to be more detailed, more specific, utilize social media platform, utilize modern communication methodologies, becoming creative with your supply chains, being creative with a lot more interactions, how you produce things, how you distribute it. So those are the challenges. You communicate and find new ways of communicating. So on today's lesson, we saw about in the new normal, how to do change management, risk management, communications management. To me, those are very, important and critical things, irrespective of whether it's new or not. These are US management graduates. You need to know these. These are very important when you come into the industry and practice as management specialist. You are going to be the next generation leaders who lead the industry, like companies, organizations around the world. You have social obligations as well as family obligations, as well as obligations to the employers whom you're going to work. So, but everywhere these 3 principles apply, and make sure that you learn more about these and practice them. So one last part about the presentation is that surviving, right? How do we survive? So you might have all heard the cliched phrase, survival of the fittest, right? That's what you need to do. You need to be fit mentally, physically, emotionally, and deliver and perform. And how do you do that? You would adapt to changes. And already I discussed the techniques to adapt to change. So you go back and do that. And I wanted to also throw another slide, or I want to talk about a few things before we went into the questions. So here are a few things how, some of the responses from think tanks. By think tanks, I mean, people at the biggest universities in the country, and what are their thoughts about, how things are going to change once the coronavirus pandemic is over, how companies will do business in the future. So the first one is organizations will develop trust-based cultures with employees. Okay, I'm not going to go much deep into these, I have a lack of time, but these statements by itself are research paper based statements. So if you need some insights, let me know. I'll later send it to you. The next one is businesses will help customers be more helpful. Remote work will become more strategic. Leadership will engage people to work together creatively. Standard operating practice will be elevated to a new level. Supply chain managers suddenly will have a much more difficult job. The best leaders will have to break out of their own silos and improve workplace culture. Employees and buildings will become more healthier. In-person meetings will be less important. Employees will take stock of the new work priorities, and the supply chain strategy will have to be completely rewritten. So those are the key things that you need to keep in mind. So with that, I'm going to go into taking the questions. So can you unmute for people who have questions?
Sunil Kumar viewership can be unmuted. Funny?
Yes, sir. Unmuted, sir.
No, still is.
He is not accepting, sir.
Okay. Okay. Are there any other questions apart from him? Sunil?
Sir, hello.
Hey,
Yeah.
Sunil, go ahead.
Sir, hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
I
Yes,
can
We
sir.
are able to
Yes, sir.
listen.
This is Sunil, sir. Hello.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
Sunil, go ahead.
Sir, can you say that?
Sunil, please type your question if you cannot talk. I cannot hear you. Hey, can you go to the next person who might have a question? I think Sunil is having audio difficulties.
Yeah. Only Sunil has raised a hand. I don't think so. There are any questions from others?
Roma, do you have any questions? Joseph has got a question.
Yes, sir. My question is pretty simple. It is like, hello, sir. Are you able to hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah. It is like, while talking about risks, America is at high risk right now. I can say it's because nearly 2 million people are suffering from COVID-19. So, for any nation, their greatest natural resource will be their citizens itself. So, how is it dealing with this risk right now? Like, how can it be so adaptive in this case?
Okay, I would like to answer these questions in multiple ways. First thing is, U.S. has been a leader around the world in bringing in transparency. Transparency is
Yes.
meaning that the government doesn't lie that much as other governments do to the people.
Yeah.
They are very forthcoming with spending money and spending money on education, spending money on research, and providing more insights into what is happening within the government, and providing details on specifically in this pandemic, how many people are getting sick, how many people are dying, and all that. This doesn't happen in all the countries. So what you know as statistics from other countries may not be realistic and may not be true. That is one thing. And also, in terms of research, US has always been the forefront of leading the research work in any area. And also in this pandemic, some of the modern medicines and vaccinations are being developed here, and as well as other parts of the world. Like there's research happening in London, Research happening at China, research happening in India, and China and India are going to be the global powerhouses to manufacture once the vaccination is identified, tested. Currently, we do have vaccination, but they are not fully tested, so you cannot use a vaccination. In the past, it takes about 10 years to get a vaccination out the door for somebody to use it. You know, when it comes to vaccinations, you need to know about a lot of stuff. You know, people are of different age groups, different sicknesses, they take medicines. So a lot of interactions have to be evaluated before people give out the medicine to other vaccine. So that's what is called clinical trials. So they need to perform that. And once that is performed, immediately they will deliver it by the end of this year and the early part of next year to all over the world. And China and India will play a major role in producing these vaccinations because currently they are the ones who are manufacturing for the entire world. About 70% of the vaccinations are actually manufactured in India.
Yes.
And there needs to be therapeutics too, different types of treating the disease when somebody gets in hospital. Over the last 3 months, there's so much education that people have learned. The place where I live in the DC area. Close to our house is another city called Baltimore, and this is where the University of Johns Hopkins is located. They are the ones who are the front runners in the whole world doing medical treatments, identifying and reporting cases all over the world about the COVID-19 or for any disease. So they are doing a lot of work and they are developing therapeutics. And the therapeutics would come only because this is a new disease. They have to do this long-term research and then release it to the world. So those are happening, but they will all come together sometime in 2021, early part of 2021. So until then, there's going to be a little bit of adjustments for everybody. But coming out of this, we have seen a lot of good stuff, like environment has changed. The environment has become more cleaner. People can breathe a lot of good air. People are identifying, what the priorities are, what is important in life, things like that. So that is what is important, and things are happening here rapidly. And pretty soon we should see a turnaround. What we call as new normal will become a normal thing for us, and then we'll be able to do much better, much healthier life, once therapeutics and vaccination. Okay, any other questions?
I think, Ravi, there are no further questions. Thanks a lot. And I would like to thank Ravi. Actually, the beginning he has introduced himself, and we found Ravi as an important person to try to deal with this subject matter because he is a subject matter specialist, especially in the risk management area, where he is working for that nearly for 24 years. I hope he has very clearly categorized how we have understood this as a risk, and again how it has turned as an uncertainty situation, and further how one needs to try to handle these situations. And especially he has touched upon the psychological aspects also, which one needs to try to understand and communicate, adopt. Well, he's a versatile speaker. We used to love to listen to him. Often he used to try to take lectures whenever the faculty is not going to turn up. So it was lovely, Ravi. We are very thankful for you and our students as well as my friends. Hope all of you have enjoyed the sessions. Thanks for us. Thanks for all for participating. Thank you, Ravi. And I would like to thank your management for giving this wonderful opportunity to share such a knowledge with all of you. And I hope this kind of support will be there in further coming sessions also. Thank you, one and all.
Hey, definitely. I would like to take a few moments to thank everyone who had, involved in coordinating this session. I really appreciate. Soma has been a very close friend of mine, and we go back like almost 26 years. So it's my pleasure once again. Thanks to the Institute, thanks to everyone who had been on this call. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to connecting with you back. Hit me on my email address. I've got my email address out there if you have any questions. They say life is short, so our time and our age is finite. So think positive, work hard, do smart work as well. Think smart and enjoy your life, live happily, stay safe. Bye.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you all. Thank you, technical team, for supporting this. See you in the next session all.